there! Thanks for listening to the Infinite Podcast, where we want to challenge the people of God to see the realities of their context and reflect on and reformulate concepts such as mission, missionary, mission field, holistic mission, and more. Greetings from the International Fellowship for Mission as Transformation, also known as Infinite. We're glad you're with us. I'm Nina Mantalaba, Content and Communication Specialist at Infinite. This interview is part of a blog series that looks to explore the intersections between art, creativity, and theology. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from Thandi Gamedze about her poetry. Today, specifically, we'll be taking a closer look at her piece titled, That Day. Thandi, thank you for joining us here today.
Sure, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Thandi, to start off, could you tell us a little bit about your life and work in general?
Sure. So some different bits and pieces. At the moment, I work part-time for an organization called The Warehouse. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and The Warehouse is based in Cape Town as well. And it's an organization that works with churches in kind of addressing different forms of injustice, both in terms of our theology, but also in terms of our practice. So I do some work in that organization, and then I'm also studying a PhD, also looking at some things around the church and how we are either, I guess, replicating and reproducing or resisting dominant narratives and dominant ideologies, trying to think around some of the dynamics of that. Then also do some bits and pieces with an organization called Bottom Up, which works with high school students, and I'm involved in a public speaking kind of program with them. So yeah, some different bits and pieces all over the place, but a lot of it has to do with thinking about how we create a better world, I think.
Wow, so cool. Kind of with that, how did you begin your journey as an artist? Maybe specifically, how long have you been composing or writing your own poetry?
Good question. I think probably I started in high school, actually, when I was at a church that I was part of in high school, and we started having these kind of creativity nights where people just brought kind of different art forms that they were exploring or working on. So I think that's actually where I started writing poetry myself. And then it kind of has evolved over the years, but has become a really important way that I kind of process a lot of the stuff that I'm thinking about. Yeah.
So cool. And we all know that, part of creativity and an important part of creativity is inspiration and context. So could you tell me a bit about your background or what communities and contexts are important to your story?
Good question. So I think one thing that's been, quite formational to who I am has been the kind of diversity of contexts that I think form integral parts of who I am. So I was actually born in Eswatini, what was called Swaziland, which at the moment is experiencing a lot of unrest, similarly to South Africa in some different ways, though. But yeah, so I was born in Swaziland. My dad grew up there and has family there. So I've got a lot of extended family there. I didn't live there for a lot of time, but my mom is British. So we moved to England quite soon after I was born. And then my dad is South African. So then we ended up back in South Africa in 1995. So I think, I guess each of these different spaces and contexts has formed part of who I am. And I think the kind of, I don't know how to say this, but the almost kind of conflict of some of the different spaces and the different identities, and kind of figuring out how to deal with all of those identities as one person in one body. I'm sure you have some similar feelings. You said you're from the Philippines, but living in the States. I don't know how long you've been in each, but yeah, this kind of feeling of bridging between these different spaces, different identities. And I think that's been a kind of a pattern for me in many different aspects of my life. And I think that forms a lot of definitely my perspective, how I see things, and also a lot of my writing. And I think the way that I kind of struggle and wrestle through different issues. So yeah, that's I guess some of the context that this is all coming out of.
Very relatable to me, and I'm sure to a bunch of our listeners, in a highly globalized world where people are moving all over the place. How do you create out of those intersections of identities is going to be such an interesting conversation. Definitely. Do you have like people or mentors that inspired you, or artists that inspire you when it comes to poetry or just creating in general?
So I've never actually read a ton of poetry. At some point, I watched a lot of spoken word poetry just on YouTube, and kind of got into that sort of scene. Really incredible poet in South Africa called Sipokazi Jonas, and I really love her work and her poetry. And yeah, I mean, various people inspire me. So Zach Stewart, who's from Cape Town, also has really inspired me with some of his poetry, but also his artwork, and the way he does that. Yeah, but I think for me, a lot of my, I guess, poetry and writing and thinking comes out of engaging with the context and engaging with what's going on. So I feel like I find my inspiration in a lot more than just, I guess, traditional creativity or people who create, but also people who think in interesting ways and have interesting analyses of what's going on. And I think in the warehouse, I'm surrounded by such people. And so all of my engagements with the people who I work with provide so much inspiration and so much to think from. Yeah.
All right. So now we'll have the opportunity to hear more from Thandi on her piece titled That Day.
That day. We fight not for the sake of fighting, but for that day when fighting is no longer required, because the darkness has finally been swallowed up by light. In that day, our fighting shall turn to dancing as we twirl to songs of celebration. Our attention will shift from destruction to creation, because all that had needed to fall will have fallen. And perhaps on day one, we will wake up confused, unsure of who we are outside of the calling to loosen the chains of injustice. But on that day, there will be an abundance of grace and space for us to find our feet, time no longer a slave driver, but a gift. On that day, we will learn to find ourselves and each other outside of a world woven of suffering. We will learn to make art, jokes, and conversation that depend not on pain. We will learn to create beauty from beauty. And while that day will not be tomorrow, nor even perhaps the tomorrow of many years to come, at least part of our work must be to train our eyes to see it. For if we can just glimpse it, our fight is not futile, but the gateway under construction between this world and that.
That was beautiful, Thandi. Thank you for sharing this piece with us. Could you tell us a little bit about the story behind this piece?
Yeah, so I can't remember exactly when I wrote it, but I think maybe a year or so ago, and actually came out of or the inspiration for it, I think, came out of a conversation that I was having with a colleague and friend, Caroline Powell, and just talking about like, you know, what are we going to do when we don't actually have to struggle anymore, when the world is a just place? Like, will we even know like how to function in that world? And I think for me, in my writing, but also in, I guess, how I see activism and struggling towards that world, I think what has been so integral for me has been the role of the imagination and the role of being able to imagine something that we're actually working towards and trying to create a path towards. Because I think a lot of the time, so one of the lines in the poem is a line that says, "Our attention will shift from destruction to creation because all that had needed to fall will have fallen." And so around 2015, what became a really big and important movement in South Africa was the Roads Must Fall movement, which evolved into the Fees Must Fall movement, and has kind of taken a few different forms. But this language of, I guess, must fall became quite, we used it quite frequently in the way that we would talk. And I guess these movements ended up being called this: roads must fall, fees must fall, outsourcing must fall. So thinking of our activism in terms of what must fall and what needs to be destroyed, the kind of systems, principalities, the issues that need to be torn down, and we live in a world that is made up of so many of those. There's so many things that need to fall. But I think the danger of activism that is only focused on what must fall and not what we need to build or what we're working towards. And I'm not saying that these movements didn't have any image of that, but I think, I think it can be dangerous if we don't have anything that we want to replace it with. And I mean, even for just the way that we do our activism, the way that we engage with each other, the way that we engage in the systems, I think needs to be formed by an alternate vision, an alternate imagination for something new. So yeah, this poem was kind of playing with that idea, an exploration of, when that day comes, what are we going to do? Like, let's explore. Will we know when we wake up on day one? Will we know who we are anymore? And if not, then that's a problem, and that's probably something that we need to be working on now. Yeah, so that's a little bit of that story, I guess.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I just wanted to let you know that I felt those kind of same emotions of, yeah, I don't know if we've collectively envisioned that together, and what would that look like for different communities. I personally think I've heard the phrase, I've heard this phrase a lot from like decolonizing efforts and the church. And one that I've said is, you know, the idea of beauty from brokenness or beauty for ashes, that despite difficulties, there's beauty. And I just love the fact that this kind of shows an idea of beauty from beauty. And that's something that like maybe we haven't really discussed or talked about. So yeah, what do you envision? Did you end up having a vision for what beauty from beauty could look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting that, because I think so, I mean, in South Africa, and I mean, I speak of that because it's my context, but I'm sure there's similarities in various other places. But I think South Africans are extremely good at like making jokes, whatever the situation is, and like being absolutely hilarious and finding things absolutely hilarious, things that like probably shouldn't be joked about because they're extremely serious and like it's a big issue. But we managed to make jokes from that pain and from those difficulties. And I think that's a big like survival mechanism and coping mechanism that we use. And then also, I've had so many conversations with friends, mostly Black women friends, and talking about how kind of what's almost expected of us in our creativity is that it is kind of birthed from pain and that it wrestles with these painful issues and it's about tough things and that it doesn't often feel like there's a lot of space just to explore beauty and just to write about like something you like, or it feels like, and I mean, I think that pressure comes from within ourselves and not only from outside, because we, I guess, embody in our bodies these painful realities and these issues, and it almost does feel like art is political, and so whether we engage with these things in our art or not has political consequences and says something political. So it's like this this interesting tension that I think anyone who does anything creative has to navigate. But I think, yeah, I think some things, so actually a series of poems that I wrote, which I've kind of strung together with a bit of narrative to make into a story, that actually felt like something that I did that was just like nice, I think. And just kind of exploring different aspects of creation and the earth, and kind of the personifying them and exploring what kind of wisdom they would teach us if they were persons in a way. And yeah, that was really nice. I mean, I think it also has kind of aspects of dealing with certain issues and responding to the world in certain ways, which I guess is the nature of living in this complicated world. But I do think there is space to create beauty from beauty. And I think that as artists, it surely has to be part of our responsibility. I mean, I think so much of it is maybe about reframing narratives, getting people to see things differently, I guess exploring things in our own heads, but also surely seeing the beauty and seeing what could be and what we're working towards. So yeah, so I definitely feel different tensions around that and different conflicts, but yeah, definitely feel a need, especially in our current climate, of creating something different and alternatives. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer. I kind of love how you pointed on the idea of there is almost like I don't know if this is the right term, but a glorification of resilience. When in fact, you know, I'm really proud of people who have had to be resilient, and they show it in their character and their personality and how it's grown over the years of oppression. But I love the idea that beauty is profound in itself, and we should also celebrate that. And I think you often bring up the idea of tensions, and that art can also almost bridge those tensions. I was like looking at some of your other work and how it mentions justice, power, decolonization, and I see all these emotions and tones that vary. How do you think poetry lets you find a balance between lament and hope? You kind of touched on this a bit, but I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, good question. So I think for me, often with my poetry, it starts from a place of lament. And I guess this is like the Psalms, I guess most of the Psalms also end up this way. But and sometimes it doesn't end in hope, which I think is also fine. And I mean, I have very strong feelings about this. I feel like in the church, way too often we jump to hope far too quickly, and I think we need to be staying in that place of lament long enough to be transformed by it, because I think this sometimes the hope that we jump to is not really a true hope, and it just kind of abstracts us from our context and from our realities in an unhelpful way. But of course I think that hope is good also. But yeah, but often as I'm writing and as my writing kind of takes me through a journey of embodying these different tensions, as you say, and really immersing myself in the thing that I'm thinking about, often it does lead me to some kind of hope, and often my poetry does kind of end in a hopeful place, which I think is quite interesting. I remember, though, I once posted a poem on Facebook which was extremely hopeless, and it kind of ended in a completely hopeless place, which for me felt like it was a right kind of description, or right. It was right for what was going on. But I think it made a lot of people really uncomfortable, and people were like, you need to just push on to the hope, and you need to get to this other place. And I think that kind of, so at the warehouse, we often encourage people to stay in this place of disequilibrium, because that's where so much of our transformation takes place, I think. And so I think one of the things that art can do is kind of take us into this place of disequilibrium. And I think if we choose to stay there, then I think it can have a transformative impact on us.
I kind of love how poetry kind of lets you stay in uncomfy and prompts you to wonder why it's uncomfy, and to almost like just ask more questions about the context, and like, why am I uncomfy? Who should be comfy? And kind of thinking of that, my next question is, what audience do you create for?
Good question. So I don't necessarily think that I write for an audience. I think most of my writing is just often it feels like it's something that needs to come out at a certain place, for I think for myself, and until it's out, like, it will feel not right. So I think a lot of it is just kind of my own process and my own grappling with something that feels like it needs to come out, or something that feels like I need to be exploring it more. But I think in saying that, I think something important can also be raised, which is that I think it's also a dangerous thing to say that you're not writing for anyone, because I think in a world which is mostly white supremacist, mostly patriarchal, kind of capitalist society that we're living in, the supposedly neutral person is often positioned as like the straight white male or whatever. And so I think over the years, I think that's been a process for me to recognize the ways in which I'm writing for that person, and whether it's writing to convince that person to change the way that they see the world, or change their narratives, or whatever it is. But I think the importance of recognizing who I'm centering in whatever I'm writing. So I think that process has definitely become more intentional over the years, and I think I don't write for that audience anymore, or I mean, where I'm trying to write for an audience, or where I'm trying to just be intentional about not writing for an audience. I think that's been part of my process, if that makes sense.
Love that. Love how there's a shift there, and there's more intention in that creation process. Yeah. So maybe specifically for this piece, how would you want or hope people respond to this piece?
Yeah. I think I really liked what you said, that it made you kind of wonder how you would feel and how you would respond on that day. And I think that is what I would hope that it would make people think about. Like, think about, yeah, if things were just, and if there was real peace, real shalom, if relationships were right with each other, with the earth, with God, with creation, if all of those things are in place, like what would I want to do? What are the things that I love to do? What creative things would I want to take up? So I think that's what I would like it to do, and I mean, not just for that end in itself, but to make people more intentionally think about what they would, not only what they would like that world to look like or that world to be, but also to think about what the process then is of how we get there. Because I think, I mean, so there's, of course, like always conversations about, does the end justify the means, and what that looks like. And I think, that there's so much complexity in that question, because how do we get from such an unjust reality to a just reality, using only the logics of the just reality, like when we're completely not there yet. So I think it's really complicated, but I think the way that we move towards that reality has to be at least trying to intentionally embody what that reality is going to be. And so I think when we imagine ourselves in that new world, whether we ever see that new world or not, and I think I definitely go through phases in what I believe about that. But whether we ever see it or not, what we believe it's going to be, or what we want it to be, has to influence how we get there, and the path that we create in getting there, and how we get there together, like how we're treating the people around us as we're getting there. So yeah, and I think to be exploring the things that bring us life on the journey as well. Like, I think there has to be that beauty in the process too.
I love that. I think for me too, reading it and listening to you, I think it's also a good anchor in a sense. It's an anchor for me to earth, because I think a lot of people, when they conceptualize the idea of one day, they often think of heaven, or they often think of, things on earth, fighting for justice or doing something in the now doesn't matter, because one day Jesus will come and it'll be fine in heaven. I think the idea of what does it mean on earth as it will be in heaven, it brings that anchor down into how could we reimagine God's justice here, and how can we be acting on that in the present and not just waiting for the future. So I also love that idea too.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
So good.
Moving on, you mentioned this a bit, but you talked about, when you talked about justice, you talked about right relationships with the earth, with others, and with God. So from your experience as an artist, how would you describe the connection between theology and art, and what has that looked like in your walk?
Yes, good question. So I guess, I mean, theology, so at the moment I've been thinking a lot about the Kairos document, which is a document that was written in South Africa in the 80s, in 1985, as a kind of theological statement about the present context. And it was a context, obviously under apartheid, but at a time in apartheid where the government was really kind of ramping up their brutality. I mean, it was like the last few years of apartheid, so it was kind of almost trying to keep its claws in, as it recognized that it was not actually a sustainable way of being, in a way. So the government was extremely repressive, and so these theologians and lay people kind of came together because the church wasn't saying much about what was going on. The church was either relatively silent or saying things which were not really helping get to a more just place, or overtly kind of perpetuating the status quo theology. And so this document distinguishes between three kinds of theology. So it talks about state theology, which was like the overtly repressive theology of the apartheid government, which the Dutch Reformed Church kind of provided this theological justification for apartheid. And then church theology, which was, it could be seen as kind of, in some ways, standing against apartheid in some ways, or a kind of moralistic stance. But in reality, because it wasn't actually grappling with the context and a contextual response, it still had the effect of legitimizing the apartheid government and upholding the status quo. And then the last one is prophetic theology, which kind of roots itself in the prophets of the Old Testament, but it's really thinking about a response from context, like a theological response from the context. So analyzing actually what's going on, and really reading the context into the biblical context and into the scripture, and trying to grapple with what God is saying to us for this specific context. So I really value that framework, and I feel like the relationship between art and theology should be that kind of role of a prophetic theology, whatever kind of art it is, poetry, painting, dance, whatever, music. I think that importance of being rooted in a context and speaking out of and speaking into a particular context, grappling with what that might mean for what God is saying to us in this specific context, and then painting a picture of what is possible, and the prophetic imagination that Walter Brueggemann talked about, like something that we are dreaming towards, and painting a picture of something different. So something that can kind of disrupt our narratives and bring us into a different place. Because I think one of the things about the system that we are currently in, and all of the ways that it works, is that it completely limits our imagination, or kind of frames the way that we can think and what we can't think, and puts our kind of thinking into boxes. And I think what art has the possibility of doing is to break those boxes in certain ways and offer us a path to think outside of that, into something different. Yeah.
I love that. Imagination is so important and so key. And I think we sometimes can forget about that piece in our theology and in our walk with God. So thank you.
Yeah.
Along those lines, what recommendations would you give to someone wanting to connect more to God or to their community through artwork?
Good question. I think, I think maybe first of all, challenging our ideas about how we can connect with God and where God is, I think. Because I think a lot of us actually find it very easy, or we're wired to be able to connect with God through many different things, through nature or through music, whatever kind of music it is, through art, poetry. I think that's kind of a natural space for us to connect with God. But I think sometimes the church has made it feel like there are limitations on the spaces that God inhabits, and that we can only connect with God through certain kinds of songs or in certain kinds of spaces, or when we are with certain kinds of people. And I think that needs to be completely demolished. I don't know how that idea still stands when Jesus, with Jesus being our example and the person that we claim to follow, when Jesus kind of broke so many of those barriers. And I think if we think about where we would have found Jesus back in the day, I think that gives us a lot of clues as to where we can find God now. So I think firstly maybe that expanding our own ideas of where God is and where we can encounter God, and then also maybe to start reading the Bible as like how it was written, like the sections that were poetry or like stories. I think start reading it like that, and and then in that, I think I think just being in my context and really being present, those are the times where I get inspiration to create, and those are also the spaces where I encounter God. And so I really think that thing of being present, where we are, and letting ourselves, I guess, be incarnate as Jesus was in the spaces that we inhabit. I think that allows us to find God wherever we are. And I think God will speak so much through creative stuff as well, because I think they really like it. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Thandi. So just to wrap up here, it's been fantastic to hear from you. And on this specific piece, how could someone learn more about you and more of your work?
Yes, this is always a question that I'm quite bad at answering. So I do have a blog, which maybe you'll share the link to in this, called Insights and Opinions. It's very poorly curated. It's not at all up to date with anything. It has some random poems, a couple of random short stories, a couple of like blog posts and thoughts. But feel free to explore that if you would like. I am on Facebook and Instagram, and sometimes I will post stuff there. So feel free to find me, Thandi Gamedze, there. yeah, that's probably the best option I have right now.
That's perfect. Thank you, Thandi, for joining us and inviting us into a communal imagination, hoping for a better future.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the platform you prefer. If you think this could be helpful for someone you know, please share it with them. The best compliment we can receive is a referral to someone else. See you next time!